Welcome to your deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at early childhood development.
Okay.
You sent in some really fascinating excerpts actually from The Scientist in the Crib
Oh, yeah, great book.
by Gopnik, Meltzoff, and Kuhl. And we're going to really try to unlock some baby brain mysteries today.
Let's do it.
We're going to explore what those tiny humans really know, how they learn, and whether their methods might hold some surprising lessons for us adults.
That's a great point.
So get ready.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun.
It is a really fascinating field.
Absolutely.
I think we often underestimate just how much is happening in those first few years of life.
Yeah. You know, one of the first things that struck me when I was reading this book
Okay.
was this idea that babies are like miniature scientists,
Oh, interesting.
constantly experimenting and testing out their theories about how the world works.
Yeah.
It sounds almost too complex for those little bundles of drool and giggles, isn't it?
It might sound surprising, but I think if you think about it, babies are surrounded by a constant stream of new information.
Oh, absolutely.
They're bombarded with sights, sounds, smells, sensations.
Right.
And they have this innate drive to make sense of it all.
So they're not just passively soaking it all in.
Not at all.
Okay.
The Scientist in the Crib proposes that babies are actively seeking patterns,
Wow.
making predictions, and revising their understanding based on what they observe.
So that's where that biological computer analogy comes in, right?
Exactly.
The book uses this idea to explain how babies process information and learn.
It's not that babies are, cold, emotionless machines, but their brains do operate on computational principles.
Interesting.
They take in sensory input,
Okay.
process it,
Yeah.
and generate output, behaviors, reactions, and ultimately a deeper understanding of their world.
Okay, so they're taking in all this information,
Right.
running their little mental programs.
Yeah.
But how do we even know what they're learning?
Yeah, that's the question.
The book mentions some pretty clever experiments.
Yeah, researchers have come up with some truly ingenious ways to peek into the minds of babies.
I can imagine.
And one of the earliest, most mind-boggling findings is that even newborns are capable of imitation.
Really? Like copying what we do.
Exactly.
Wow.
As young as 1 month old,
Oh,
babies will attempt to mirror facial expressions.
barely.
You stick your tongue out at a baby, and there's a good chance they'll try to do the same.
You know, I've definitely tried that with my little nephew.
Okay.
I think he mostly just thought I was making funny faces.
Probably.
What is that kind of imitation?
Right.
What does that tell us about how those baby brains are working?
I think it suggests that even at that incredibly young age,
Okay.
babies have an innate awareness of other people as beings like themselves.
Interesting.
They're starting to make connections between their own actions and the actions of others,
Uh-huh.
a foundational element for developing social understanding.
Yeah. So they're not just responding to a stimulus.
Right.
They're actually trying to connect with us on some level.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
it is.
But babies don't just stare at faces all day.
Oh, they tell.
They start interacting with the world around them, playing with toys, exploring their environment.
Right.
Does that change how they learn?
Absolutely.
How so?
Around 1-year-old, babies enter a stage the book calls the cognitive triangle.
Okay, the cognitive triangle.
This involves the baby, another person,
Okay.
and an object.
I'm picturing my nephew, his mom, and that stuffed elephant he carries everywhere.
Exactly.
Right.
Babies become intensely focused on objects.
Uh-huh.
But more importantly, they begin to grasp that other people have their own relationships with those objects,
Okay.
their own desires and intentions. And that can lead to some very interesting scenarios, especially when those desires clash.
Like the classic broccoli and goldfish experiment the book talks about.
Oh, yeah.
That one always cracks me up.
It's a perfect example of how researchers test this developing social awareness.
Okay.
Imagine a baby presented with 2 bowls,
Okay.
one with yummy goldfish crackers,
Okay.
the other with raw broccoli.
Okay. Even I wouldn't pick the broccoli in that situation.
Right.
So what happens?
Here's where it gets interesting.
Okay.
The researcher expresses a strong preference,
Okay.
either delight for the broccoli or disgust for the goldfish.
Okay.
Now, 14-month-olds, still in that stage of assuming everyone wants what they want,
Right.
will offer the researcher the goldfish regardless.
Interesting.
But 18-month-olds,
Yeah.
those tiny social geniuses will actually hand over the broccoli even if they personally find it repulsive.
Wait, They're giving up what they want
Right.
to try and satisfy someone else's completely bizarre desire.
Yeah.
That's pretty advanced understanding for such a little person.
It really is.
It is.
It shows they're beginning to grasp that other people have minds of their own with desires independent of their own. It's a crucial step in developing a theory of mind.
Okay, a theory of mind.
Which is essentially understanding that other people have thoughts, beliefs, and perspectives that might differ from theirs.
And we all know what happens when that understanding gets put to the test in the real world.
Oh, yeah.
Hello, terrible twos.
Right.
But the book suggests there's more to those tantrums
Right.
than just a desire for cookies.
Exactly.
Right.
It's not just about getting what they want, but about testing the boundaries of this newfound understanding. They're pushing back to see how their desires clash with those of others, which, as any parent can tell you, can be both frustrating and fascinating to watch.
For sure.
But it's an essential part of their social and cognitive development.
So those meltdowns in the cereal aisle
Exactly.
are actually tiny social experiments in action.
In a way, yes.
That gives a whole new meaning to the terrible twos.
It does.
Okay, but does this developing theory of mind mean that babies can actually see things from another person's perspective?
Wow.
Like literally understand that what they see might be different from what someone else sees?
That's a more complex step, and it takes a bit longer to develop.
Okay.
The scientist in the crib describes an experiment
Right.
where young children try to hide a toy from a researcher by placing it on the researcher's side of a screen.
So in their mind, if they can't see the researcher can't see them.
Exactly.
It's like they haven't quite grasped that people have different visual perspectives.
It takes time for children to fully develop that ability to step into someone else's shoes, mentally speaking.
Which probably explains why reasoning with a toddler can feel like talking to a wall sometimes.
Yes, but it's important to remember that even those seemingly simple interactions, hiding a toy, offering a snack, are actually laying the foundation for their incredibly complex social understanding as they grow. And those early foundations have a profound impact on how they'll navigate the world as adults.
Okay, we've talked about how babies are learning about people.
Right.
But what about the world around them?
Okay.
How do they go from experiencing a jumble of sensations to actually understanding that objects exist, even when they can't see them?
That's another fascinating area of research.
Yeah.
It might seem obvious to us that a table is still a table even when we leave the room, but for babies, that understanding doesn't come automatically.
It's like the old saying, out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the scientist in the crib draws a really intriguing parallel with magic shows.
Oh, okay.
Think about why we find magic tricks so fascinating.
Okay.
It's because they violate our deeply held beliefs about how the physical world works. Objects can't just disappear and reappear, right?
Well, unless you're David Copperfield.
Right.
I'm still trying to figure out how he made the Statue of Liberty vanish.
That's the point.
Okay.
Magic highlights those fundamental principles of physics.
That we usually take for granted.
Okay.
And babies, in a way, are figuring out those principles too.
Oh, interesting.
They're constantly experimenting, observing, and revising their theories about how objects behave.
So they're like tiny physicists in diapers.
In a way, yes.
What kind of experiments are they running?
One of the key things they're working out is something called object permanence.
Object permanence.
This is the understanding that an object continues to exist even when it's hidden from view.
I remember reading about Piaget's experiments.
Yes.
Where he'd hide a toy under a blanket.
Right.
And the baby would act like it had simply vanished.
Exactly.
Like, poof, it's gone.
Younger babies will lose interest as soon as the toy is out of sight.
Right.
But as they get older, they start to grasp that the toy still exists.
Okay.
Even if they can't see it, they'll actively search for it.
Interesting.
Which indicates a pretty big leap in their understanding of the world.
So they're not just reacting to what's right in front of them.
Right. They're building mental representations of those objects.
Precisely. They're starting to form those mental models we talked about earlier, representations that allow them to make predictions about how objects will behave.
That's amazing.
It's not just about whether an object exists or not.
Okay.
It's also about how those objects move and interact.
So like figuring out that if you drop a ball, it's going to fall to the ground,
Exactly.
not float up to the ceiling.
They're fascinated by trajectories by how objects move through space and time.
Wow.
They track those movements, they anticipate where an object will go, and they get genuinely surprised if something violates those expectations.
It's like they're building their own little understanding of cause and effect.
Right.
Of how actions lead to consequences in the physical world.
Precisely.
Why?
And they do all of this with remarkable efficiency.
Wow.
Constantly gathering evidence, testing their hypotheses, and refining their understanding.
It really is remarkable. When you think about all those mental gymnastics going on in those tiny little heads.
Absolutely.
It's no wonder babies need so much sleep.
They do.
Speaking of complex mental processes, we can't forget about the incredible feat of language acquisition.
Of course.
This one's always baffled me.
Yeah.
I mean, we understand it so effortlessly as adults.
Right.
But when you break it down,
it's
a mind-bogglingly complex system of sounds, meanings, and grammar.
It is.
How do babies even begin to crack that code?
It's one of the most amazing and still somewhat mysterious aspects of human development.
I can imagine.
But the scientist in the crib shed some light on the incredible learning mechanisms at play.
I'm ready.
And one of the most surprising findings is that babies are born with a remarkable capacity for language.
Hold on, so it's not just a blank slate.
Right.
They come pre-wired for language in some way.
Exactly.
Wow.
From the moment they enter the world, babies can already distinguish between different sounds and show preferences for certain ones.
So they're not just hearing a jumble of noise.
No.
They're actually picking up on patterns and making distinctions.
Precisely.
Wow. And here's the truly mind-blowing part. They're not just tuned in to the sounds of their native language.
Right.
Studies have shown that babies can distinguish between sounds from all sorts of languages, even those they've never heard before.
That's true.
So they're like little universal listeners.
They are.
But we all know they eventually narrow their focus to the language they're exposed to.
Right.
How does that happen?
It's a process of specialization. A kind of fine-tuning of the system. As babies are exposed to a particular language, they begin to form what the book calls prototypes. These are mental representations of the sounds that are most important in that language.
So like mental templates that help them organize all those incoming sounds.
Exactly.
And this process starts incredibly early. Between 6 and 12 months, those prototypes are already starting to take shape.
Right.
Guiding their attention to the specific sounds that will eventually become the building blocks of words and sentences.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And this is all happening before they're even saying their first words.
That's right.
Wow. It's amazing to think about all that unseen work going on in their little brains just from listening to the world around them.
Right.
But eventually those first words do start to emerge.
They do.
And that's where things get even more interesting.
Absolutely.
We often assume that babies learn words by simply associating sounds with objects.
Right.
But the research suggests a much more complex and nuanced process is at play.
It does.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about how babies actually make those connections. Between words and meanings.
Well, one surprising finding is that those first words aren't always what we expect. It's not just mama and dada. Babies often use words like gone there or uh-oh as some of their earliest linguistic expressions.
That's interesting. Those are words with a lot of, I don't know, emotional weight.
Right.
I guess you could say.
Yeah.
I can definitely picture my nephew yelling gone every time someone hides his favorite toy.
Exactly.
Right.
And researchers who've studied these early words have noticed something fascinating.
Okay, what's that?
Babies often use them in ways that go beyond their typical adult meanings.
So it's not just about labeling objects.
Right.
They're using these words to express concepts, ideas, even emotions.
Precisely.
Wow.
One researcher described how a baby in her study used the word gone in a variety of contexts.
Oh, wow.
A piece of sugar disappearing under wax paper, a picture being turned in a book.
Wow.
Even his mother leaving the room.
Interesting.
It suggests they're grasping a more abstract concept of disappearance or inaccessibility.
Wow. So it's like they're building their own mental maps of the world.
Right.
Using these early words as guideposts. And even when they do start using those classic first words like mama and dada,
right,
it's not always as straightforward as we think.
It's not.
I swear, my nephew called every man he saw dada for the first few months of his life. My brother wasn't exactly thrilled about it.
Right. It's a classic case of overgeneralization.
Yeah.
They're making sense of the world by applying these new words to concepts that are important to them. They're not just mimicking sounds. They're actively testing the boundaries of meaning.
So it's like they're running their own little linguistic experiments.
In a way, yes.
That's fascinating.
It's a messy, sometimes hilarious process, but it speaks volumes about their incredible drive to understand the world around them.
Absolutely. Okay, we've talked about how babies make sense of the physical world,
Right.
how they learn about people, and how they begin to crack the code of language.
Yeah.
But what's actually happening in their brains during all of this?
Right.
It's almost like they're operating on a different level than we are.
This is where things get really fascinating.
Okay.
Neuroscience is giving us an increasingly detailed picture of what's going on inside those amazing little brains. And one of the most important discoveries is that the baby's brain is not a static organ.
Okay.
It's constantly changing, adapting, and rewiring itself in response to experiences.
So it's not just about adding new information.
Right.
It's about the very structure of the brain itself being shaped by those experiences.
Exactly.
Wow.
By the time a child is 3 years old,
Okay.
their brain is using twice as much energy as an adult brain.
Really?
It's a period of intense growth and development with neurons firing and forming connections at an incredible rate.
So it's like a constant fireworks display of neural activity that's going on during this neural explosion.
One of the key processes is called synaptogenesis.
Synaptogenesis.
The formation of new connections between neurons.
Okay.
These connections, called synapses,
That's
are what allow different parts of the brain to communicate with each other.
So it's like building a network of roads that connect all those different cities in the brain.
That's a good way to visualize it.
Yeah.
And these connections are being built and refined constantly.
Wow.
Based on the baby's experiences.
Okay.
Every new sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste triggers a cascade of neural activities, strengthening some connections and weakening others.
It's amazing to think that something as simple as cuddling a baby or singing a lullaby is actually shaping the physical structure of their brain.
It is.
But what about those periods we hear about where babies seem to lose brain cells?
Right.
Is that something to be worried about?
It might sound counterintuitive, but it's actually a crucial part of development.
Okay.
It's a process called synaptic pruning.
Synaptic pruning.
Where the brain gets rid of unnecessary or weak connections.
Okay.
It's kind of like streamlining a network to make it more efficient.
So instead of losing brain power, they're actually becoming more focused, more specialized.
Exactly. And this process is influenced by experience.
Okay.
The connections that are used frequently get strengthened, while those that are rarely used get pruned away.
This makes me think about how adults often feel like their brains are full.
Right.
Or that it's harder to learn new things as we get older.
Yeah.
Are we stuck with the brain wiring we developed as kids?
It's true that the brain becomes more specialized as we get older, but that doesn't mean we can't learn new things.
Right.
It just means we might have to work a little harder, be more deliberate in our efforts.
So the experiences we have in early childhood lay a foundation.
Yeah.
But they don't determine our entire cognitive destiny.
Exactly.
Okay, that's good to know.
We continue to learn and adapt throughout our lives.
Right.
But those early years are a time of incredible opportunity, a time when the brain is most adaptable and responsive to experience.
This all makes me wonder about the whole nature versus nurture debate. Are we born with these learning abilities, or are they shaped by our environment?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
And the scientist in the crib takes a balanced approach.
Okay.
Suggesting it's not an either-or proposition.
So it's not nature versus nurture. It's nature and nurture.
Precisely.
Okay.
We come into the world with certain innate predispositions, a kind of biological scaffolding that supports learning.
Okay.
But that scaffolding needs to be built upon through experience, through interaction with the world and with other people.
So it's like we're born with the potential to learn language.
Right.
But we need to be exposed to language in order for that potential to be realized.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the same applies to other areas of development. We have these incredible innate capacities, but they need to be nurtured and cultivated through experience.
This makes me think about how we often talk about talent as if it's something you're either born with or not. But maybe it's more about recognizing that we all come into the world with unique potentials.
I think so.
And those potentials can be developed and expressed in countless ways, depending on the opportunities and support we're given.
I think that's a really empowering way to look at it.
It is.
It shifts the focus from limitations to possibilities.
So instead of asking, am I talented enough?
Yeah.
we should be asking, what are my potentials and how can I nurture them?
Exactly.
I think that.
And maybe that's one of the most profound lessons we can learn from babies.
Yeah.
We all have this incredible capacity for growth and learning, but those capacities need to be supported and encouraged.
This has been an incredibly enlightening look at those early years.
It has.
And we're just getting started.
Oh, no.
But for now, let's take a quick break and come back to explore what the scientist in the crib has to say about how understanding babies can actually help us become better learners ourselves. Welcome back. We've been exploring some pretty amazing things babies can do. It's honestly hard to believe how much learning is packed into those first few years.
Yeah, it really is remarkable. And the more we understand about how babies learn, the more we realize it's not just about accumulating facts. It's about building these complex mental models of the world.
That's right. We talked about how babies are like little scientists constantly experimenting and testing out their theories. But what does that actually look like in their brains? How do they go from experiencing a jumble of sensations to understanding how things work?
The scientist in the crib delves into this by explaining that babies aren't just passively observing the world. They're actively trying to figure out the underlying rules that govern it.
So it's not just about knowing that a ball is round and red. It's about understanding that if you drop a ball, it will fall to the ground.
Exactly.
It's about cause and effect, about how objects behave and interact.
That's right. Babies are creating these mental maps, these frameworks for understanding, and these models are constantly being revised and updated as they gather more evidence.
That makes me think about how we often talk about children having vivid imaginations. But maybe it's not just about fantasy. Maybe it's a reflection of their ability to manipulate these mental models. To explore different possibilities and scenarios in their minds.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. The ability to imagine, to think counterfactually, is a really powerful cognitive tool. And it seems like babies are already starting to flex those mental muscles from a very early age.
Okay, so we've got these incredible little learners building these intricate mental models. But they're not doing it alone, right?
They're not.
The scientist in the crib talks a lot about the importance of social interaction in learning. It seems like a bit of a contradiction. These tiny scientists are also incredibly social beings.
It might seem counterintuitive, but social interaction is actually crucial for cognitive development. Babies are wired for connection. They're not just passively absorbing information. They're actively seeking out interaction, especially with their caregivers.
This makes me think about all those seemingly insignificant moments. The peekaboo games, the silly songs, the endless rounds of drop the toy, pick it up. Are those actually laying the groundwork for their social and cognitive development?
Absolutely. Those seemingly mundane interactions are filled with learning opportunities. Every time a caregiver responds to a baby's babble, offers a comforting touch, or shares a smile, they're sending a really powerful message. You are seen, you are heard, you matter.
Wow. It's like they're building a scaffolding of love and support that allows those baby brains to blossom.
Exactly. And those early relationships provide a sense of security and trust that allows babies to venture out and explore the world with confidence.
Okay, so it's not just about emotional support. The book also talks about how adults directly contribute to babies' cognitive development.
Absolutely. One of the most important ways we do this is through language.
Language.
The way we talk to babies, the words we use, the stories we tell, all of this shapes their understanding of the world.
This brings to mind that sing-songy way we instinctively talk to babies, sometimes called motherese. Is there any scientific basis for that?
There is.
Like, is it actually helping them learn language?
Yeah, it turns out that motherese, or parentese, as it's sometimes called,
parentese,
have several features that make it easier for babies to learn. It's slower, more exaggerated, and has a higher pitch, which makes it more attention-grabbing for those developing ears.
So it's not just about being cutesy. We're actually making the sounds more distinct, more noticeable.
Exactly. And motherese is also more repetitive, which helps babies pick up on patterns and learn new words. It's often paired with gestures and facial expressions, providing even more clues about what those words mean.
So without even realizing it, we're creating this multisensory language lesson.
We are.
But it makes me wonder if we're overthinking things sometimes.
Yeah.
Do we really need all those fancy educational toys and apps? Or is it more about just being present and responsive, about having those back and forth interactions?
I think those simple interactions are far more valuable than we often realize.
That's a good point.
Babies are learning from every experience.
Uh-huh.
The most important thing we can offer is our attention,
Right.
our love, and willingness to enter their world and see things from their perspective.
It's a good reminder for us adults, too.
It is.
We tend to think of learning as something that happens in a classroom or from a textbook.
Right.
But maybe we need to recapture some of that playful exploration.
Yeah.
That willingness to experiment and make mistakes that babies embody so naturally.
Absolutely. Babies aren't afraid to try new things,
right?
To get messy, to make mistakes. They see every experience as a learning opportunity. That's a mindset that can benefit us at any age.
So maybe instead of trying to be perfect parents with all the answers,
right,
we should focus on being curious co-explorers alongside our kids.
I think that's a wonderful way to approach it.
Embrace the messiness and just enjoy the journey.
Parenting, like all learning, is a process of trial and error, of constant adjustment and adaptation.
Speaking of learning,
okay,
I'm curious about something the book touches on.
Okay.
The idea that babies might actually come into the world with some innate knowledge, a sort of core knowledge that forms a foundation for all their learning.
Right.
Are we really saying that babies might have an intuitive understanding of things like physics and psychology?
It's a fascinating concept, and one that has generated a lot of debate among researchers.
Right.
The authors of The Scientist in the Crib present evidence that babies seem to have a basic understanding of certain fundamental concepts, things like number, space, and even the minds of others, even before they have the language to express those understandings.
That's pretty mind-blowing. What kind of evidence are we talking about here?
One example they give is research on babies' understanding of number.
Okay, number.
Studies have shown that even very young infants can distinguish between different quantities, like 2 objects versus 3 objects, even before they can count or use number words.
So they're not just seeing a bunch of stuff.
Right.
They're actually registering the number of items.
Exactly. And this suggests there might be a more fundamental pre-linguistic understanding of number at play.
That's incredible. It's like they have this built-in sense of quantity. What about this idea that babies might have some innate understanding of other minds?
That's where things get really interesting.
Right.
We know that babies are drawn to faces from birth.
Right.
And quickly learn to distinguish between different facial expressions.
We talked earlier about how babies can even imitate facial expressions.
Yes.
Does that tie into this concept of core knowledge?
It could. The authors propose that this early sensitivity to faces and expressions might point to an innate understanding that other people have their own thoughts, feelings, and intentions. It's not just about recognizing a pattern. It's about realizing that those patterns convey meaning, that they offer a glimpse into another person's inner world.
So this brings us back to the nature versus nurture debate.
Right.
If babies are born with this core knowledge, does that mean learning is predetermined?
Not at all. The authors of The Scientist in the Crib take a much more nuanced stance. They argue that we come into the world with certain predispositions, but those predispositions need to be cultivated and developed through experience. It's not nature versus nurture, but nature and nurture working together.
So we're born with the potential to learn, but that potential needs to be nurtured by our environment and experiences.
Exactly. We have these incredible innate capacities, but they need to be shaped and refined through interaction with the world and with other people.
It's a powerful reminder that we all come into the world with unique possibilities, and those possibilities can flourish given the right opportunities and support.
I agree.
This discussion has been absolutely fascinating.
It has.
And we're just scratching the surface of what The Scientist in the Crib has to offer.
Right.
But let's shift gears for a moment and explore what all of this research means for us as adults.
Okay.
Can understanding how babies learn actually help us become better learners ourselves?
That's a great question.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Yeah.
We've been on quite a journey exploring the amazing world of baby brains and how those tiny humans learn.
It is incredible to think about all the complex processes happening in those first few years of life. And as we've been discussing, The Scientist in the Crib suggests that understanding how babies learn can actually teach us a thing or two about being better learners ourselves.
I'm really intrigued by this idea. So much of our focus is on teaching children.
Right.
But what if we flip the script
Yeah.
and ask, what can we learn from them?
Yeah, it's a powerful shift in perspective.
Yes.
And one of the key takeaways from the book is that Babies are incredibly adept at something we often struggle with as adults, embracing a growth mindset.
Okay, we hear a lot about growth mindset these days.
We do.
But what does that actually look like in a baby?
Think about how babies approach challenges.
Oh,
They don't get discouraged easily. They see setbacks as opportunities to learn and try again. They're constantly experimenting, exploring, and pushing their own boundaries.
it's like they have this innate belief that they can learn and grow.
Yeah,
They're not afraid to make mistakes because they see mistakes as part of the process.
exactly. And that's a powerful lesson for us as adults.
It is.
We often get so caught up in the fear of failure that we avoid challenges altogether.
Right.
We forget that mistakes are essential for growth.
So maybe instead of beating ourselves up when we stumble, we should channel our inner baby and say, okay, that didn't work. What can I learn from this? How can I try again differently?
Precisely embracing a growth mindset is crucial for lifelong learning, and babies are the ultimate role models for this.
Another thing that strikes me about babies is their incredible curiosity.
Oh, yeah.
They're fascinated by everything they want to touch, taste, smell, and explore everything in their environment.
That's a key driver of their learning. They're not just passively absorbing information.
Right.
They're actively seeking it out. They're asking questions with their eyes, their hands, their whole bodies.
That makes me think about how our education system often tries to stifle that natural curiosity.
Yeah.
We sit kids down at desks, tell them to be quiet, and try to fill their heads with facts.
Right.
But maybe a more effective approach would be to nurture that curiosity, to create learning environments that feel more like playgrounds than prisons.
I think that's a beautiful idea.
It is.
When we create spaces where kids feel safe to explore, to ask questions, and to make discoveries on their own terms, that's when real learning happens.
And this applies to adults too, doesn't it?
It does.
We learn best when we're engaged, when we're passionate about a subject,
Right.
when we feel that sense of wonder and excitement.
Absolutely. We need to make space for that kind of playful exploration in our own lives.
For sure.
Whether it's trying a new hobby, delving into a fascinating subject, or simply looking at the world with fresh eyes.
So the next time you find yourself stuck in a rut, maybe the answer isn't to force yourself to study harder.
Yeah.
Maybe it's to reconnect with that childlike sense of wonder.
Yeah.
To find something that sparks your curiosity and dive in head first.
I love that. Embrace the joy of discovery. That's a lesson we can all learn from babies.
The Scientist in the Crib has really opened my eyes to the amazing learning abilities of babies. But it's also made me think about how we can apply these insights to create more effective learning environments for children of all ages. What are your thoughts on this?
I think one of the important takeaways is that we need to shift our view of children from passive recipients of information to active constructors of knowledge. Babies aren't empty vessels waiting to be filled. They're brilliant little learners, constantly experimenting, making connections, and building their own understanding of the world.
So less drill and kill and more guide on the side.
Exactly. Our role as educators and caregivers is to create environments that support and nurture that innate drive to learn.
Okay.
We need to provide opportunities for exploration, encourage questions, and celebrate the joy of discovery.
That makes me think about how we often try to baby-proof everything to create these perfectly safe and sterile spaces for kids.
Yeah.
But maybe a little bit of mess and a few bumps and bruises are actually good for them.
There's growing evidence that risky play within reason, of course, is crucial for development.
Okay.
It helps children build physical skills, problem-solving abilities, and even emotional resilience. They learn to assess risks, make decisions, and bounce back from setbacks.
So maybe we should resist the urge to hover and let them climb that tree, build that fort, or experiment with that messy art project, even if it makes us a little nervous.
Within safe boundaries, absolutely. We need to give children the space to test their limits, to explore their capabilities, and to learn from their own experiences.
Another important theme that runs through The Scientist in the Crib is the power of social interaction.
Yes.
We've talked about how babies learn through those back and forth exchanges with caregivers, through joint attention, through shared experiences.
Right.
It's not just about providing information.
Yeah.
It's about creating those moments of connection and communication that fuel their learning.
Exactly. And this principle applies throughout childhood and beyond.
Correct.
Children thrive in environments where they feel seen, heard, and valued, where their ideas are respected, and where they have opportunities to engage in meaningful conversations. It's about creating a sense of community, a shared journey of discovery.
So maybe instead of lecturing children or drilling them with facts. We should focus on creating spaces for dialogue, for questioning, for the collaborative construction of knowledge.
I couldn't agree more. Children are natural learners, and they learn best when they're actively engaged, when they're part of a community of inquiry. And that's something we can foster in our homes, our schools, and our communities.
This has been an incredible deep dive into the fascinating world of baby brains, and it's left me feeling both humbled and inspired. Humbled by the incredible learning capacity of these tiny humans, and inspired to recapture some of that wonder, that curiosity, that joy of discovery in my own life.
I feel the same way. The Scientist in the Crib is a powerful reminder that we're all born with an innate drive to learn and grow, and that drive never really goes away.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's take a moment to appreciate the incredible learning machines that babies are, and let's challenge ourselves to embrace those qualities that make them such brilliant learners: the curiosity, the playfulness, the fearlessness, the open-mindedness.
Because those qualities aren't just for babies, they're the keys to lifelong learning, growth, and fulfillment.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed exploring The Scientist in the Crib with us. And until next time, keep those baby brains in mind and keep diving deep into the world around you.